Hey there. Welcome to First Look. Thanks for being here today. It's evening. I feel like you're probably not watching this in the evening. Uh, I'm glad to be back here with you again. So, um, I'm having an interesting week, or I will be having an interesting week. As I record this, tomorrow in worship preaching, and sorry, and and then I get on a plane for Salt Lake City, Utah, of all places, which I've never been to. And I'm going to be at uh, General Assembly, which is, if you don't really speak Presbyterian, it's like it's the denomination's big conference, right? You have presbyteries, districts, synods, a General Assembly, and then that's where everything gets made, so to speak. And it's fascinating. I'm going as an observer. I'm going to learn. I'm going to meet some people, and it's a fascinating thing to get to watch. What does it mean to do what I do everywhere, and from a billion different perspectives, which is fascinating. But before I go, I wanted to make this. So we're continuing to move through Samuel, and I opened this up, and I actually can't remember at all what passage it is. I'm looking at the passage, but I don't know what it is. When I say this is a first look, I'm not kidding you. It's not like a little gimmick for the 20 of you who are watching this. It's just like this is what. Okay, so here's the passage. I'm gonna have to flip to it. We're in 2 Samuel, chapter 5, verses 1 through 5, and then 9 and 10. And the week we just had, well, I haven't preached it. I'm preaching it tomorrow, but you've listened to it by now. We were talking about the end of an era. You know, you have the death of Samuel, Saul, Jonathan, and then David trying to pick up the pieces and move forward and draw the people together. And I was trying to kind of draw a line between, not just about grief, but about the kind of the road to recovery. And when I say recovery, I think that means a lot of things for a lot of people, depending on the situation. Because you could be recovering from grief or a grieving period, an intensely grieving period in your life. Or we could be talking about an illness or the death of someone else, or just something huge that happened in life, a big change, a big, altering kind of thing. And I think one of the things that I'm still kind of learning in my own life is what does that mean to have your past there? It's not, you're no longer that person because you're different now, or life is different now. And so you're navigating it. And, what does it mean to either hold on to the idea of God with both hands, to lose that completely? Where do we go? How do we think about it? That part of life, I think, is equal parts overwhelming and exciting in some ways, terrifying in other ways, heartbreaking in some ways. And that's the part that I think that I was trying to kind of explore a little bit. And I hope it's clear in some ways why I'm doing this. I mean, because I tend to preach in a way that I think, I hope speaks genuinely to my own experience, right? But also one that I think speaks to a lot of people's experience, because I assume that in your life you have things that have been like that for you. And some of them you've been very willing to talk about with people, family and friends and whatever. And maybe some of them you have never talked about. And I'm not trying to get you to do that. You might find it helpful, but I'm not trying to get you to do that. I recognize that the life-altering things that we go through aren't always for public consumption, not only because they might just be private to you, but they involve other people. There are other people's stories that are involved, other people's lives. And so the point of it isn't for me to get you to express that to another person, although that might be what you need to do. Maybe that would be freeing. But I think it's helpful for me to consistently try to remember that the person in front of me has probably gone through something that I can't even imagine. That we'd have to be alone in a room for a very long time for it to ever come up, if it ever did. And but that doesn't mean they're not thinking about it every day. It doesn't affect them every day. And I can't assume that I know who that is. There are some people I think that live out those experiences a little bit more out loud than other people. But that doesn't make it any less true for everybody else. You may have gotten good at, moving on or pretending it didn't happen or just healing. You may have gotten really good at healing and you left something where it needed to be left. But I still need to treat you as someone who has gone through that, has worked through that, because it's important. It's important to your story. So we're kind of moving on, speaking of stories, we're kind of moving on with David's story. And now we're starting to focus for the next couple of weeks on his story more specifically. Just so you know where we're going. We're going to be hitting a couple more stories with David, and then we're going to be pivoting really hard to Ephesians. That's where this is headed. Just to kind of give you an idea. Okay, so this is 2 Samuel chapter 5. This is verses 1 through 5, and then 9 and 10. And what I find really important about this story is kind of what I've been thinking through the last several weeks. Because what you see in the story is David distinguishing himself uniquely, I think, from Saul. I think that I knew that Saul and David were different, but I wasn't always really able to pinpoint why or how. And I think the more I look at it through this, David's not a better person. He's just more in tune with the priestly aspects of what it means to be a king, at least in this context. That's what I think I see. So I'm kind of exploring that a little bit more. So this is, again, 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 1 through 5, and then we'll skip down to 9 and 10. All right, we're going to start there. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "Look, we are your bone and flesh," which is a huge deal that all the tribes did that. "For some time while Saul was king over us, it was you who led out Israel and brought it in. The Lord said to you, 'It is you who shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and who shall be ruler over Israel.'" It's like them accepting this, right? "So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old, 30 years old. All of this has transpired, and he's still just 30. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years, which is a lifetime. At Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and at Jerusalem, he reigned over all of Israel and Judah for 33 years. And then he makes Jerusalem the capital, which is obviously a huge deal. We kind of skipped down a little bit for the sake of time. David occupied the stronghold and named it the City of David. David built the city all around from the Millo inward. And David became greater and greater, for the Lord, the God of hosts, was with him. And that's the story. And the passage, I named it, or the title of the sermon I named Loyalty. And I did so, I think, because, I planned some of these things out a few months in advance. I did so because what I wanted to do was, one, talk a little bit about David as being loyal to God, but I also really wanted to talk about the people, these elders and leaders and tribes, because I think that we think, because I think we hear the Israelites or Israel, and we kind of think about them like, oh, they're all of the same mind. Yeah, we know they're different tribes, but like, are they really? Like, why does that matter? Do I have to care about that? And the answer is yes, we do have to care about that. And I am certainly not either smart enough or just know enough to be able to tell you all of the differences between these tribes. But there is a divide, right? Because we know that there are. We know that eventually those who were loyal to Saul and those who were loyal to David butt heads, and that's how we end up with this divided kingdom. And those loyalties play a enormous role in what would happen moving forward. It's almost indescribable how important that is. I can't even really get my mind around it. But I think what I see in this text that was really fascinating is the people saying, look, we know this is now the reality. We know that you have proven yourself to be this one who God wants to be in this position. And so we're going to unite around this, and you're going to be our king. And so, that was a moment of acceptance that I think was really fascinating. And I think the subject of loyalty, I think, is one that's a really interesting one too, especially, I don't know, maybe in a modern context is really interesting, because I think we all kind of view it a little bit differently. I think the closest term that I would associate with loyalty, I think is, and I don't mean this strictly as an American idea, but the concept of patriotism. I think it has an interesting kind of, there's a Venn diagram there somewhere around what does it mean to be loyal to something outside of yourself, and when do we decide how that loyalty plays itself out. And it's a really complicated idea, and which is why I think I find it so fascinating. because at what point do we continue to be loyal to something? Um, you know, how many times would a person have to prove themselves not to be worthy of our efforts? How many wrongs, how many lies, how many whatever would have they have to, you know, spew out before we thought, you know what, maybe being loyal to this person isn't for me? Or how broken would a system have to be before we said, maybe not this one? Maybe we've just, how do we cut our losses? Do we ever cut our losses? And that's, I think, fascinating, because there's hope in that, right? Because we've been kind of playing around with this concept of what does it mean to hope, and how is hope obviously a good thing, but how can it also be a negative thing? We explored that a couple of weeks ago. And then, because what it means to be loyal and what you're ultimately loyal to, where your loyalties lie, where are those breaking points and lines? You can kind of define the word a lot like love. We all know what love is, but what does it mean to love, right? How do I love my neighbor as myself, especially if I have trouble loving myself? How do I love people that I don't like? What if, does that mean just, accepting everything that you do, some of what you do? Where does tough love fall into that? Where do boundaries come in to love? You say I love you, and that seems like a good thing, but it's also like, it's got a lot of complications. Loyalty is kind of the same thing. And ultimately, it would be hard for me to argue if you said, well, ultimately the people should be loyal to God. Yep, can't deny that that's true. I think time and time again, the people of Israel are faced with this. What are we loyal to? To whom are we loyal? And where I read it coming into, them butting heads with destiny, is when they decide being loyal to God isn't what they're going to do. So I think I'm really interested to see what studying that a little bit looks like. Loyal to an idea, loyal to a concept, loyal to God, loyal to each other, loyal to a nation. Where does that play out? How do we know if we're being loyal? If you rail against a leader, is that loyalty to something greater than the leader? Or is being loyal to the leader being loyal to the nation? Does ultimate loyalty lie in being for the empire or being for the rebels? Who is more loyal to what? Those who stood for, the British Empire, or those who spilled the tea in the harbor? I think that's fascinating, and I think it says a lot about us. I don't know if it's good or bad. I think it just says a lot about us if we talk about what we are ultimately loyal to. If we start to break that down, what ties will we break in order to keep other ones? Because I've watched that happen in churches and families, and over and over again. And that's, heartbreaking and fascinating and beautiful and all those things. And sometimes I just like sermons that allow you to kind of think about an idea. and kind of pray on it. I think that's ultimately where I've been the last several weeks with this series, and I think it's probably going to continue. Is I'm not necessarily trying to convince you of something, but I am trying to um, open a door, point at something, and say, "Hey, look, I'm dealing with this. You're dealing with this. Probably some version of it. Let's not be alone as we deal with it." And then also to give thought to something that maybe you've always taken for granted or you've never really explored. I think one of the great privileges of being in a place now, not that I've been here for 20 years or anything, but I've been here now a few seasons. It's not like I've been here for 2 years and I'm just now getting to know you. I've at least seen a few cycles of, we've seen, staff who have gone and who have come and who have gone. We have seen, people who have passed on. We've seen people who have joined who are new. People have babies. People have grandchildren. People have, and we've gotten to witness all that. And, I think I value more and more and more this conversation that I feel like we're having. No one sermon of mine is the last one. At least I don't perceive it as the last one I'm going to preach to you. It's like I get to keep talking to you, and you get to keep talking to me, and I get to keep learning about you, and vice versa. And I find that fascinating. And so this is like one more opportunity. Like, how do you think about this idea? What comes to mind? What does it mean to be loyal to God? Because being loyal in that context, in loving, there's a lot of crossover there too. Because am I ultimately being loyal to God by following the scripture this way or that way? And, I'm going to General Assembly, as I said. And there's a whole host of people in that room who I believe genuinely are trying to be faithful to God. And they're going to try to be faithful to God and look at the same thing very differently. What you and I might call a very conservative way, in a very liberal way or progressive way or whatever, in a kind of central, kind of seeing both sides kind of way, moderate, maybe you could call it. I'm going to see all of that played out in front of me for a few days. And, with great passion. And it's not all going to be pretty, but some of it's going to be beautiful. And, you get to see the church up close, and at least a slice of it, right? Because you get to see people from everywhere. These are just elders and pastors from, Iowa and Florida and California and Massachusetts and, Missouri. I mean, they're from everywhere. Big churches, small churches, and like I said, across this sort of spectrum of theology. And what does it mean for any of them? Would any of them use that term, loyalty to God, love, or for each other? I don't know. I'm interested in seeing where that goes. So that's what I'm thinking about tonight. It's interesting. So I hope you have a good week. It's not lost on me that we're also talking about this sort of loyalty concept 4th of July week. That's not lost on me at all. So anyway, the confluence of all those things is fascinating. So something to think about. Just kind of roll it around your mind. Anyway, I hope you have a lovely week. I hope that, your holidays, is what you need it to be. You know, kind of however you celebrate it. I hope that is what you need it to be. I'm looking forward to kind of sharing a little bit of what my experience was like. Thank you for being you. Thanks for joining me on this this silly little journey of first looks that we do. And I'll see you next time for this thing we do. So until then, take care.